Episode 4 of Foundations of the Future. We start with the vertical farming spotlight. I wrote an article called The State of Vertical Farming this week. The reason I wrote it is because the majority of the rhetoric about vertical farming is very negative. Now, there's a lot of negative information about vertical farming over the last couple of months. We've seen a lot of bankruptcies and woefully missed milestones. But what about the positive side of the argument? And second of all, it was to distill down what the mistakes, what the missteps were by all of these vertical farming companies, including ours, and how we imagine we're going to rectify them, or how we're going to make better decisions in the future. In the same period of time, I came across this article by Big Think, and it is a perfect parallel to the rhetoric about vertical farming. It was in 1903 that the New York Times said, it may be 1 to 10 million years before we see human plane flight. 9 weeks later, the Wright brothers cracked the code. In 1910, the New York Times comes out with another article saying, plane flight is only for the rich. Only those who can afford yachts could afford to fly in a plane. It's exactly the same as vertical farming. I can't tell you how closely this mirrors what people say about vertical farming. First they say it can't be done, then it's done. Then they say it can't be done at scale, then it's done at scale. And then over the years, through all of these innovations and improving reliability, it makes economic sense for the masses. For whatever reason, these articles just completely miss the time dimension, or when they make an estimate on the time dimension, they're 6 orders of magnitude off. 1 to 10 million years. What an absolute banger. Let's spend a couple minutes pointing out the top 3 mistakes made by vertical farms. Misstep number 1 is technology over tradition. Lots of these vertical farming companies attempted to develop their own technology. LEDs, HVAC, irrigation techniques, automation techniques. All of these technologies already existed out in the market. In fact, because LEDs had become so much more efficient and much less expensive, that's really what enabled vertical farms in the first place to become economically viable. So as opposed to all vertical farms developing all subsystems from scratch, these vertical farms should have integrated proven at-scale solutions to take care of many of these subsystems and then innovated really where it counts, particularly on the software side, the machine learning, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and those kinds of areas. Misstep number 2, food was the product, not farms. I think that was a mistake. If you call yourself a technology company and ultimately your revenue comes from the sale of produce, it's harder to justify that you're a technology company. If you make the claim that you're a technology company and you license hardware and software out into the market, that makes more sense. Now, it's not only the valuation multiples that make the technology route more attractive, it's also the speed to scale. How do we get 1,000 vertical farms out into the market by 2030? Is it by finding each of these geographies ourselves, financing each of these farms ourselves, operating each of these farms ourselves, selling the produce through each individual distribution chain in each location ourselves? I don't think so. It's by licensing this hardware and this software to organizations and individuals in each geographical location, because they already know the distribution chain in that location. They know who to sell to, they know what prices, they know what crops. That way we can get 1,000 farms out into the market by 2030, and they can be run by entrepreneurs or businesses in each location. We, 1.1, continue to provide value on the hardware side and the software side, increasing yields, increasing quality, but we allow the entrepreneurs, the farm operators in each location to make those geographically specific decisions. Similar to data centers, right? The organizations that develop the electronics to store and transfer data were not the organizations that spent all the money in scaling them. Microsoft and Amazon buy data centers. They buy the technology that goes into those data centers. Yes, there is innovation in elements potentially with cooling and data transfer, but the core technology has been developed by a third party. Same with vertical farming. Vertical farms need to develop the technology and then license that technology in each location. Misstep number 3 was the concept that vertical farms were going to feed the world soon. Greenhouses are incredible technology. They've been around for 50 to 100 years. They still struggle to get this technology to the most destitute populations worldwide. Vertical farms aren't going to solve that problem in the next 5 years. It's going to take time. Same with plane flight. Now, it's incredible that humans somehow managed to go from a canvas wooden aeroplane going 100 meters to a rocket and a space module landing on the moon in about 60 years. It's going to take a lot less than 60 years for this technology to reach commercial scale. Vertical farming as an industry is sound. The fundamental technology, the business model is sound. It will take time to scale this technology into each of the verticals, whether it's vertical farming as a nursery for greenhouses, or for the production of fruits and vegetables, or the production of supplemental materials, or biopharmaceuticals, or medicinal plants, or other starter crops. Many mistakes being made along the way, I agree. We made some of them, many of them. But right now, a couple of companies in the vertical farming industry have been able to find a small keyhole through the clouds. And through that keyhole, you're going to get the first full-scale, market viable, economically viable vertical farming deployments. And the rest is history. Section 2, human and environmental health. We're going to focus on environmental health today by trying to understand really what is the number one problem facing the environment. There is an incredible amount of information about CO2 emissions, CO2 sequestration. I don't believe climate change is the number one problem facing the environment. I don't think it's close. I think it's a big problem. I think we need to be focusing on it. I think we need to solve the problem. And the US, by the way, is already doing a great job. Year over year, CO2 emissions are actually decreasing in the United States. But I want to focus a little bit more on what I believe to be the number one environmental issue in the world, and that is land use change. What is land use change, and what is the rate at which it's occurring? Land use change is the process of taking natural landscape, raising it to the ground, more or less, again to put it nicely, and then farming it. Whether it's farming the food that we eat directly, or it's farming the food that our food eats indirectly, feeding the animals we eat, we use almost 50% of habitable land to grow plants. For scale, urban landscapes take up about 1% of land space in the world. 50% is for the production of food. We take an area the size of 2 Germanys every year since 1960 and change its use. Kill or displace the animals, pull all the trees out, use that soil in ways that it isn't prepared to be used just to sustain ourselves. This is a big problem. We need to start turning that around. I believe it's the number one environmental issue, and we aren't talking about it. Section 3, Future Tech, we're going to have a look at China. China has spent upwards of $62 billion to build an aqueduct to transfer water from the wet south to the dry northwest. There are 3 major arterials, most of them already built, that deliver billions of metric tons of water on an annual basis to these drier areas. What a fantastic example of infrastructure. As a fun fact, in 3 years, China poured more concrete than the United States poured in the 20th century. Pow! China seems to be investing a massive amount of money into infrastructure. All kinds of infrastructure. Roads, rail, aqueducts, obviously military. And in many ways, the United States feels dormant in this regard. Whether it's dams, electrical generation, the electrical grid, roads, buildings. The United States feels dormant at least. There's lots of money that needs to be put into these different projects just to be able to maintain them. But looking at the growth of the United States population, looking at the wealth increase in the United States, we've got to support our population with infrastructure. I think the United States is really falling behind in these ways. For example, I think in California, the budget exploded up to beyond $60 billion for the slowest high-speed rail in the world in California over the last few years. That's not good enough. The US is much better than that. We shouldn't accept that. We've got to look at which infrastructures we need to maintain first, and we've got to look at which infrastructures we need to develop for the coming generation to improve their economic prosperity. And of course, to improve our global competitiveness. It's vital that we remain competitive in that regard.